So we just start as we normally do, just resting through the back of the pelvis and then resting through the back of the ribs. Just allowing the shoulder blades to get pulled down into the ground and then just resting through the back of the head. And just taking a couple of breaths just deeply into the tummy. Just feeling the tummy rise as you breathe in. And the tummy sinks back as you breathe out. And each breath out just helps to lengthen the spine. Let the drawbridge of the sacrum roll away. Let the back of the head roll away. So we just start to unfurl the spine. Let the sit bones get pulled down into the ground. And the front of the thighs can start to disconnect from the pelvis a little bit. And just letting behind the ears, we've been playing a little bit with this, thumbs underneath the base of the skull, creating space at the top of the spine. Letting the eyes rest back. So particularly for those of us that have spent the week looking at the computer screen, it's an opportunity just to let the jaw go into the back of the head. It's an opportunity to let everything just rest into the back parts of the body. Spend long periods of time looking forwards because, of course, that's where the eyes are. The arms wrapped around the back of the ribs, but coming forwards off the front of the ribs, which often pulls the ribs forwards and tucks the tail under. So we're just letting all of that unwind for a moment. Eventually, as the pelvis starts to disconnect from the top of the legs, we get that separation between hamstrings and sit bones. And this lets the feet lengthen. The more we unfold the drawbridge of the sacrum and let that roll away towards the heels, the more the feet lengthen. So we start to feel space between the snooker ball heel and behind the balls of the feet. That deep centre of the foot starts to open up and soften. The front of the ankle starts to soften. And this lets the ribs just start to soften back more. It's all connected. We know that we've got footprints on the inside of the waist. So as the feet start to lengthen and soften, the waist starts to lengthen and soften. We get space between the hip and the ribs. And then that gives rise to the back of the ribs, and the ribs start to lengthen out and soften. The neck can start to lengthen out and soften. And then we get space at the top of the spine and the underside of the skull. So we can just breathe here and just allow everything to come back down to ground. So we take the arms up over the body. If it's nice to make that loop with the thumb into the palm, and we start to find the back of the hand and the long index finger bone that comes down into the wrist. And we can just make that loop there when we hold the index finger and the squashy part between the thumb and the index finger, lets the long arm bones drop back through the sockets. It lets the shoulder blades come back down to ground, and there's a broadness to the collarbones. and a spaciousness into the underarms and the side of the ribs. So as we start to take the arms up towards the top of the mat, can we draw the front of the ribs back towards the spine? It's a soft movement rather than a forced pulling back. It's like we've got a big gravity button underneath the solar plexus around the base of the ribs and the top of the lumbars. Can we let that just be pulled back towards the centre of the earth without affecting the pelvis? If we pull the tummy back in towards the spine, you can try this for yourself, but when we pull the tummy back in towards the spine, it tilts the pelvis under. And there's nothing wrong with that, because we do want that for some movements. But for this, we're just looking for the front of the ribs to just sink back into the back of the ribs, and the back of the ribs to just sink back into the ground. And what that gives us is a great space down the side of the ribs, down the underside of the arms, and the arms start to come up. So we feel that there's a lot of work going on in the inside of the tummy. There's a lot of space starting to open up into the underarms. Now, the arms might not come down to the floor, and for those of us that are very flexible, it's keeping the arms plugged in through the sockets into the side of the waist, into the side of the ribs. Noticing that point where we might start to hang the arms out the sockets. They are heavy. And because we're holding this index finger, we've got some purchase on the arms into the solar plexus, and we can create space by drawing the hands away, draws the arms away, goes down through the inside of the shoulders, starts to pull the ribs apart. So we start to get space between each individual rib. And for those of us that are serial rib flarers, you know who you are, because the ribs start to come off the floor and everything starts to come off the floor and the back starts to arch. Can we keep that reciprocal relationship happening where the arms are feeding the spine and the spine is being fed into the floor, and yet the hands are taking the arms up somewhere towards the wall at the top of your mat? So when we come back to centre, the arms can go through the sockets and come back over the body, and then it's good to change over the hands if you haven't already. But just taking your time to explore that. Keep the arms nice and long if you can. Notice if the elbows are bending. When the triceps, the back of the arms, don't want to relax and release into the shoulder sockets and give space into the underside of the shoulder sockets, then the elbows start to bend. So just watch for that. It's a tricky one, because for those of us that are very flexible, we can turn the elbows inside out. We don't want to lock the elbows out, but equally we don't want them so soft that the hands are hitting the floor and the underarm of the underside of the arm, or the back side of the underarm, isn't moving out of the socket. It's a strong movement into the side of the ribs and into the tummy. And then we simply reverse that process by feeding the long arm bones back into the solar plexus. And the arms can come back and up. So we feel like the back of the arms get a little bit of a workout, because like I say, arms are heavy, they're half a stone in weight each. Noticing what's happening with the head. We've still got that resting back of the nose and the jaw. So the next time the arms come back over the body, we can let the feet get pulled down into the ground. And we want to be behind the balls of the feet and in the front of the snooker ball heel. So the centre part of the foot is getting sucked down into the ground. So the front of the ankle, we put a nice gravity button into the real center of the foot, that eye. You know, sometimes in yoga you see eyes drawn on the soles of the feet, and it's always, if we traced a line through the front of the shin and through the front of the ankle, where we land in the sole of the foot, if we go straight down, that's the place where we're looking to get that pull down into the ground. So when we pull there and keep pulling down, we sink the front of the ankle back into the heel. Then we find that the shins start to get pulled down into the ground. We're always looking at those long bones to go deeply into the ground, maybe 3 foot, 6 foot underneath us. Can we feel that the shins are getting pulled down into the ground? That will take the knees forwards towards the end of your mat. Something that starts to look like bridge appears, but it's not because it's a push of the hips up towards the sky. It's because we go down to come up. And there's nothing wrong with either movement, they're just different. So can we just keep finding, it's exactly the same movement, we just keep finding that pull down through the foot, pull down through the foot, pull down through the foot. What happens in the back of the knee? We start to get space. What happens in the front of the hip? We start to get space. Because the thigh bones start to now be able to drop back through the hips, but they're also being drawn away by the knees. So we get a big opening up in the front of the hip. And we start to get drawn away. And then there becomes a crossover point where the legs now are drawing the pelvis away, drawing the long waist away. This starts to give us lovely space into the low spine, like the rope being pulled out of the water. Notice the big toe joints and the inside of the heels. We want that even weight distribution through the whole foot, so that we feel that the whole thigh is working equally, that the whole inside of the pelvis is working equally, that the corset of the waist is working well. And as the whole lot gets drawn away, then we can bring the arms into that equation at some point. There's a crossover at the point where the tummy is being drawn back towards the spine, which creates a hollowing underneath the ribs. And then because the front of the ribs are being drawn back into the spine, as the spine gets pulled away, the arms naturally then start to create space at the side of the ribs and space into the underarms, and the arms start to float then. The whole lot keeps feeding back into the spine. The more we go in, the more we get space to come out. And the descent is just the same. The arms feed back through the spine, through the shoulders into the spine. The arms feed back through the legs into the spine. We start to come down. But there's a spaciousness and an integrity to it at the same time. And just playing with that. So for those of us that are a little bit further along in the journey, you might find that the fingertips start to come down to the ground either side of your head. And we start to open the palms towards the ground. But like I say, it's a little bit further on. So if you're just working with that connection with, the tricep can be a little bit too close coupled to the shoulder. We were talking about this in another session, about the sit bone being a little bit too close a little bit too close coupled to the hamstring, which pulls the tail under. And it's the same for when the arms are coming up over the head. A lot of the time the back of the arm is a little bit too close coupled to the underside of the arm and down the sides of the shoulders. And again, just being mindful of that elbow bend, particularly if you're working with your bridge pose as well. The elbows will bend if we haven't got the space into the underarms. So just being mindful of that. And that's where your index finger coupling really will help you to create that spaciousness on the inside of the elbow and keep the arms somewhere a little bit straighter. It's quite a strong pull. Yeah, exactly that, Lisa. So when you're there, then it's just finding that pointy part of the elbow then. So once the hand is on the ground, then the pointy part of the elbow then leads away towards the sofa at the top of you. Yeah, exactly that. Super easy. No, it's not. And you've got help as well, of course. So, you know, when we're laying and we're just taking the arms straight over the head, this is already creating the conditions, quite a strong movement. It's already creating the conditions for the spine to go in the two directions. We find that in our bridge, so that when the hand starts to come down to the ground and then the elbow goes away, that's where your wheel pose comes from. So no different than your bridge and your other bits and pieces. So feeling that the big toes can come into the ground, pull the knees in towards each other, that will give you more. We want to keep going back to the center. So inner thighs, inner pelvis, inner waist, exactly that. We're keeping the elbows in, so we're bringing those in and the elbows are going towards the thing. The head will get involved at some point and just go, no, I'm not doing it. And you can feel the pull down on one side and allow that opening to happen. And then you can feel the pull down on the other side and allow that opening to happen. So you can do one side and then the other. Because both together is quite a strong move. It's good, Sarah Jane, so pull the ribs back into the spine a little more. It's much better. So it brings a different dynamic to our bridge, because all of a sudden bridge isn't a static movement anymore. It's that there is no end goal to it. So a bit more inside of the heels, Joanna. And big toes and sit, and then knees come in together and you go back into the inside of the pelvis. Wheel pose is an interesting one because we have to get the mind under control first, because the desire to push in this movement is quite high. You know, we kind of gear up for this thing that we perceive to be quite different to our bridge pose, and that's why when we've got our bridge pose and we've got our arms, we can feel that we're being pulled in the two directions at once. And that feeling, that flavour, when we bring that through into your wheel pose, is no different. But it's holding on to that as the brain goes, I think this body's quite heavy. I think I have to deploy this, this and this muscle. I think I have to, we're gearing up for a bench press. So it's a head game first and then a movement game second. Can we keep the flavour of these foundational movements and then take those through into some of the more complex, some of the deeper movements? Just want to have a look at. That's it, Fabi. So, and you want a nice good pull. Once you've got hold of the hand, you want a good pull that's going to pull the elbows open and pull the arms straight and pull the arms out of their underside of their sockets. Yeah, it's much better. And then we pull the ribs back towards the spine. So the next time we come down, we're just going to let the knees float in towards the tummy. I'm going to give the knees a nice hug, have a little rock from side to side. Coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. We're going to come up into our lovely square pose. Not so lovely square pose. And again, just plugging the awareness into the spine. That's a practice, not a perfect, but we want to be able to do that. So we just bring the mind's eye into the back of the skull. In yoga, it's called drishti. But we just take the gaze. For some of us, having the eyes closed is a better thing. For me, I've always got my eyes closed. It works for me. Other people have their eyes open, whatever feels good. But it's taking that gaze inwards. So when we're in something like square pose, the eyes can turn inwards and we start to quite literally just imagine with your mind's eye the inside back of the skull, and then we can start to walk down the inside of the spine. And because we're here in this arrangement, we've got the weights of the body that we can play with. The head is heavy, so as we feel the nodding of the head and the neck spine starts to move, that gives us it gives the brain stuff to work with, so we can start to imagine walking down the inside of the neck, walking down the inside of the ribs and the inside of the low spine. We want to be able to walk the mind down the inside of the vertebrae, almost like running fingers down the keys of a piano. Like I say, it is a practice. In yoga, we call it drishti, or the gaze, and it's that turning inwards of the gaze. We're the only animals in our kingdom that can do this. We are self-aware, and we have the potential for interoception, so we can go in here and start to have a wander around and like survey the landscape, if we like. There's a vast universe in there, and we can start to assess the landscape. Hello, Pam.
Probably a silly question.
Not at all.
Am I thinking or am I doing, or a bit of both?
Never a silly question from you, Pam. It's a good question. Does the mind move the body, or does the body move the mind? I've probably written an essay on that a long time ago. When we touch things with our mind, your mind is so powerful. I did an exercise with somebody I was working with this week. They were working with me, actually, the other way around. And she got me to imagine this lemon. And she took me through this process where we were imagining this lemon and we were cutting the lemon and we were smelling the lemon. And she said, "Are you salivating?" And I was, but there's no lemon. There's an imaginary lemon. And, you know, this is the point that she wanted to show me, was exactly how powerful. But your body responds. It doesn't know that the lemon's not real. But your mind has just planted this idea of the lemon. So when we're walking down the inside of the spine with our brain, like, you know, walking the fingers down the keys of the piano, does the vertebrae start to move in response? Yeah, because we're like, well, can I touch that? Oh, yeah, maybe I can, maybe I can. But it becomes you know, it's a reciprocal relationship between the mind and the body. Does cat pose come from here? Yes, it does. Because, you know, once we can touch in with these places and visualize them, then yeah, we can. It is like sticking a physical finger on them, and we do start to move vertebrae around. This is the origins of movement, the basis of movement. Without, it's kind of a dodge around the conditioning and the compensation, the patterning that we have. Because if I said, you know, come onto all fours and do your cat pose, you kind of get the same sort of movement, but the awareness, that underpinning of the awareness isn't there. Does that make sense? Yeah, Pam's like, yes, I get that. Does that help, Fabi? I know Fabi's new in here, so we're, yeah, some interesting concepts. And there might be parts of the spine that aren't available to us. As we walk down the inside, and this is why this practice is so important, because as we walk down the inside of the spine, we might have the base of the skull, we might have the neck, we might have some bits of the ribs, we might have no low spine. For me, you know, and I've said this before, base of the ribs, top of the lumbars was a particularly sleepy area that I had to get stuck into, because I couldn't access that with my mind. And if you can't access it with your mind, we tend to skip over that, and that's where our movements become a little bit familiar. We start to do a cat pose without parts of the spine because they're not accessible to us. So can we bring our brains into them? We bring our mind's eye into them and touch them and start to move them around. And that's where the origin of our movement comes from. So cat pose comes from here, but it becomes a spine-wide event rather than just our favourite bits, all the ribs flapping up and down. Dog pose is here. Your upward dog pose or your cobra is here. So we've got the opportunity, you know, cat pose is kind of a foundation. The upwards movement in cat, where we arch the back, will take you back into a downward dog. And the downwards movement, where we're allowing the spine to lengthen in two different directions, will take us forwards and up into our upward dog type thing. But they're just exploratory movements again. As soon as we give them a name, it gives us a goal. And however we get there, we will get there. So can we be slightly more intelligent than that? We go up because we get pulled down, same as our bridge pose. So the hands being pulled down into the ground, the shins being pulled down into the ground, ankles and feet. All right, Diana. Good. So the same with your dog pose as with your bridge pose. Can we allow that to be a pull down into the ground? Can we allow that to be the sole of the foot being pulled back towards the wall behind you, the pelvis being drawn back towards the wall behind you? We've got this lovely free sit bones that we've been working on. You know, we've still got the drawbridge of the sacrum rolling away. We've got those lovely soft elbows, pointy parts of the elbows looking back towards the spine. And then the ribs drawing in towards the spine. Yeah, exactly that, Fabi. So we let the front of the spine just draw back into the ribs. And again, this starts to give us the opening up of the side of the ribs and the underarms that we had in our bridge pose. Same thing. So we can, if we're happy with our bridge pose, I'm not sure your workout buddy is more of a help or a hindrance, Lisa. It's nothing quite like trying to do downward dog with a tail in your face. So it might be, if you're a little bit further on with your downward dog, that you can join the hands together like we did before and pull those down into the ground and see if we can create that loop in our square pose. It's challenging for shoulders. We have to pull the ribs in a little bit more. And then can we take, either we can take the sit bones back and that will find us into our child pose, or if we want to make it into a dog pose, we can just pull that down into the ground and the toes will tuck under and we move back in that way. But just again, noticing this is a rewiring of the arms into the solar plexus. They tend to be very plugged in at the top of the shoulder and the side of the neck. So we've got this firing sequence of the thumb that takes us through the top of the arm, side of the neck and the top of the shoulder. But when we've got the hands together in the index fingers, that drops us through the centre of the chest. We come through the heart centre first and then we can drop down into the kind of the sling or the hammock of the diaphragm second. So the arms start to get reconnected back to the side of the ribs. Exactly that, Diana. It will make you yawn when you hit your diaphragm right. And that's okay, because we want that. We don't move enough through through the solar plexus. We're a little bit squashy through there sometimes. The shoulders can do all the work and the hips can do all the work, but can we keep sending that work back to the centre of the body? So, you know, downward dog forming, you know, part of the sun salutations, and it's exactly that. We want to work with the solars. Solar meaning sun, plexus meaning brain, and it's all the centre of the body. Just the upstairs thinks it's running the show. The middly bit knows it's running the show. Yes, exactly that, Diana. Then you feel that the ribs can move back. And we grow out of the arms. We plant the arms down into the ground and we grow in the opposite direction, up towards the sky. This is good. It's hard work, so do rest when you need to. It can be hard work for wrists, particularly when the shoulders are a little bit overbearing. Letting the jaw smooth into the back of the head, let the nose smooth into the back of the head, let the eyes smooth into the back of the head, and that keeps the head at the top of the spine. Heads are heavy. All right, Fabi. Do you want to see? We can. Oh. So, if we're working with let's put the hands together. So we're looking at creating this lift, this connection through here. Microphone in the way. We're looking at we let the elbows be soft so that the long arm bones can come back into the ribs here. And there's this pull, and it might be too strong on the arms initially because it takes quite a lot from the triceps to not have the hands on the ground. So, you know, play with both. If it's nice to have the hands closer together, we can just keep pulling the arms down, and they send the ribs up initially and then back, which takes us back into, you know, whatever we want it to be. So it can be our child pose here, or if we're talking about dog, then we've got toes and, you know, this lovely snooker ball heel, center part of the foot can pull down into the ground, and then that just takes us. So we've got this part of us that's going up and back, and then the feet pulling onto the ground, which takes us up and back. And, you know, hands can pull down into the ground. So we're looking for that opening up of the space into the underarm here, which takes this part of the ribs back. Just like that, she says. But it's sending it back into here rather than having it up in here all the time. Yeah.
So can I ask you something?
Of course you can.
Because I had this problem with my hand and the thumb.
Yes.
It takes time to go back to kind of a
Yes.
bearable state.
Yeah.
What do you do? Because obviously doing this for me, it's very strenuous because of the pain comes.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
What
So,
do you suggest?
yeah, so letting the hand present to the ground in your cat pose and making nice circles with the elbow. And then when we're looking at this movement, we can come down onto elbows, which Ronnie is going to be really happy about. So we can come down onto elbows. And it's the same thing. So we've got the pull of the pointy part of the elbow. We've got this lovely, now we've got more surface area to work with. So we've got this lovely long forearm. And we want to put our gravity buttons into the underside of the wrist and the pointy part of the elbow. And these are the two parts that pull down into the ground. You'll feel that the palm starts to open a little bit. It's almost like the cat, you know, pawing at the cushions. We get this sort of, you know, opening at both ends of the forearm. So we've got space into the wrists, which will soften the thumb. And then also that will soften at the top of the shoulders here. And again, that gives us the same movement. We'll start to move back. And we can have our child pose if that's where we want to be. And it's really important that, you know, exactly as you said, Fabi, if you're working with something or your body doesn't want to go there, when we find something else. So if we're here, then it's great. And again, we can take the toes under. At some point, we will run into the legs. And we've got the same movement coming through. We can still create the loop. You know, we can create that imaginary loop with the hands, with the forearms on the ground. Yeah. Keep presenting the hand to the ground and creating space into the wrist. And then when it's had enough, we can change. You know, wrists are a little bit grievous. And they require lots of work, but also lots of compassion as well. So we keep feeding we use the pull of the forearms down into the ground to bring the long arm bones through their sockets, and then the shoulder blades on the back of the body start to come together. The jaw comes into the back of the head, and we start gathering in around the ribs. You know, the arms are always looking to get back in to gather around the ribs. Hello, Ronnie.
So I've just been trying to concentrate on just feeling each vertebra.
Yeah.
And I'm very, very aware, and have been for a long time, of like whole patches that just act as one block.
Yes.
Rather than individuals. And
yeah.
I really feel like if there was another person there sort of going like this on each one, it might help.
Absolutely.
Obviously, I haven't got anybody here that can do that. So is there anything else I can do, or is it just literally about visualising it?
No. So when I used to train with a lovely lady called Phil, she's an absolute powerhouse of a woman. She was only like 5 foot tall, but she was 70 and was doing handstands, and she was absolutely wonderful. But she used to come into class with a bunch of broomsticks, which all, you know, made us laugh a lot because obviously we're a bunch of witches. But you stick your broomstick down your shirt, and you know, if you've got a t-shirt and you've got, you know, leggings on or something that's got a waistband on it, you can put your broomstick down the inside of your clothes all the way down, and then the aim of the game is you want to touch in on your broomstick with every part of your spine, and that gives you a reference.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right then.
Make sure the Amazon man is not delivering at that point, or nobody's going to wander in while you're playing with your broomstick. The other thing that you can do is you can do that movement against a wall. So give yourself a little bit of space between your heel and the wall behind you, or skirting board, or whatever it is that you've got. So just for the back part of the pelvis. And then from there, the game is, can I touch in with the sacrum? And then, you know, the thing with the wall is it's harder work because we're working a little bit against gravity. Whereas when we're in square poses, the spine is a bit more waggy. So the wall is more unforgiving, but it's more rewarding, because actually being able, you know, for me, I'm quite sleepy here as well, the connection of sacrum into the low spine. For many of us, that's the same. So trying to draw that back into the wall and touch in with each individual part. And the aim of the game with our wall is that, can we get the back of the pelvis, the smile at the base of the back of the ribs, then the shoulders, and then the head on the wall as well. And what you'll find is there's this deep upward pull on the front of the spine. There's a deep lengthening that happens on the front of the spine as we go towards the wall. And that will help to start the process of, we can't separate vertebrae from each other. They do that themselves. Just as a process of us, just keep the fact that you've identified that there are clumpy bits in your spine, the brain is already processing that and is already working on it. So, you know, it's an interesting thing, because you come into a session one time and then you just find that something has changed, but you don't feel that you did anything particularly. But that's because the inner workings of the fascia are sorting themselves out in between times. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah. So we all need a broomstick.
Yeah.
This is good. So we're going to come back into our child pose if you haven't already. We're going to make our way up to standing. Just going to check on our time. I haven't got my clock. Okay. This is good. So finding the feet. And of course we will do our in-person thing at some point as well. Probably in the autumn we'll come together. So again, that centre of the foot, we are training ourselves that we don't need to push the floor away and stand up because it's too heavy on the joints. So we're training ourselves again that centre of the ankle, centre of the foot is pulling down into the ground. The more that pulls down into the ground, the more that softens the front of the ankle, softens the back of the knee, and softens the front of the hip, and the whole lot gets pulled all the way into the underside of the ribs. And we've got space here. And again, the more the feet pull down, notice if one side pulls harder than the other. We want equal pull on both sides initially. And this starts to bring us up into the underside of the ribs and the corset of the waist. So again, can we touch in with, can we imagine this keystone at the base of the spine? It's a roof, it's not a back wall. But can we just imagine that is connecting into the very, very base of the spine, And can we touch in with that with our mind's eye? We feel that the tummy gets drawn back into it. And this starts to give us upward lift out of the waist. So we start to get a length to the waist. And the more length we have to the waist, the more length we have to the feet. And this is the origins of balance. So the more we get pulled down into the ground, can we feel that the sit bones, they're not so close coupled to the back of the legs, they can lift. And this keeps giving us space into the front of the hip, into the front of the hip. So we can bring the arms up and the back of the hand rests in the palm of the hand. So again, when we're coming up, we're coming out of solar plexus first because the arms are dropping back into solar plexus, which is what makes them come up. So we've got lots of space at the top of the shoulder. And it feels like, again, we've created that loop so the hands can take the arms, which take the ribs, off the waist. So the whole lot gets pulled up off the waist, and we take the body nice and long. And we want that. So can we feel that the more the arms get pulled up towards the sky, the more the ribs get pulled up out of the waist, the more the arches of the feet lift, and we need to pull down with the big toe joints and the inside of the heels. And we can rest when we need to by giving our arms a nice, because it can be quite tricky for shoulders initially. And if we're happy here, maybe there's a foot that can become free from the floor. And again, it's the side of the waist. Remember that your legs don't finish at your hip, your legs finish at your underside of the ribs. So when we've got a foot that comes off the floor, we've got one foot that's pulling down into the floor, we've got the other foot that's it's almost like the fishing reel in the waist, reeling this leg in towards us. So it's a pull that comes from the inside of the spine. So notice what happens with the sit bones. If it's too much with arms as well, leave the arms out of it and just work with the legs for a second. It can be, if you know that when you pull the knee in, we get this sort of a movement and the pelvis tilts under. We don't want that so much. We want to leave the sit bones high and the legs come in, and then you'll feel that sort of in the obliques and into the deep parts of the waist. And there's nothing wrong with either movement, we just don't want one of them to become favourite. And generally, that tilting under of the pelvis is our favourite move. It requires a lot of leg to do that, and we want to be back into the centre. So, one side always more compliant than the other, of course it is. But again, it's the origins of our balance come because the leg comes up because we get pulled down. When we start to really get this into our mind, then it's like internal puppeteering. We go down and we come up, we go down and we come up. Fundamental for life, we want this. Because when we can still do this when we're 90, we're not falling over. So it may be, if we're a little bit further on in our journey and the leg is coming easily off the floor, and I know some of you are there, then from here we start to test we start to test the limits of where we can take that leg. So can we pull the foot down into the floor? Can we lift the arms out of the ribs, out of the waist? And we might have something that starts to draw us, but it's because this part moves, and the limbs are just an extension of that. It was looking really good, Lisa. We start to look at the boundaries of where we're integrated, and then the brain goes, I could just extend this way, and then we fall out of it. Limbs are heavy and they destabilize us. So we have to have that kind of, if we think about the plant pot again, we need to have our plant pot and our soil with the limbs planted into it firmly. And they grow out of that foundation that we create. And we extend out of that pot just ever so slightly. And of course, when we're in balancing moves, it costs us, because we lose the posture. But you know, great things happen here when we just can, again, it's a mind game. Can we just stay with the pull of the foot and the connection to spine, the pull of the foot and the connection to spine, and we end up somewhere. And the brain goes, but where do we end up? Where do we go? And that's the part of us that we're starting to bring under control by these movements, because it doesn't need to know. It's on a need-to-know basis, and the frontal cortex doesn't need to know. Can we be body-led rather than mind-led? And of course, we'll have one side that's very happy and one side not so much. And that's okay. Jaw into the back of the head, Diana. That's it. Take the gaze inwards if you can. Leave the eyes open if you need them. The very, very, very later stages, the eyes do close, but yeah, taking the eyes out of when we're balancing is for a lot of us a step too far. It certainly is for me. You're in your balance, close your eyes, all hell breaks loose. But that process of integrating changes the way that we walk, because as we come into these movements, we're here when we're walking, then the brain remembers this stuff. So we've got legs that are connected to the deep waist, we've got arms that are connected to the deep waist, and then walking becomes a body-wide event, not just the sum total of hips and shoulders. Ribs in towards the spine, jaw into the back of the head, go back into the back of the pelvis. It will come. And of course, we'll have a favourite side and a not so favourite side, so make sure you do both. And look for that point, look for the line where we start to push. Very easy to do that, particularly in these movements. We feel like we're going in the direction of something, and the brain's like, yeah, this is great. So where is the boundary between where we're floating in our movement? You know, Vandy used to talk about spontaneous, was it doing yoga posture? There's a way of doing yoga asana without the slightest effort. Effortless effort. So where can we stay in the effortless effort, and then where does it become a push and pull as we try to attain a shape? This is good. So if you're halfway through your movement, take your time. If you're ready to come down to sitting, then we can do this too. So just finding your way down in your own time. We're just going to, if you need a cushion underneath just at the back of the pelvis, then you can. And have the knees soft if you need them to. We're just going to take the legs a little bit wide for a second. Not too wide for those of us that have got gargantuan hip range. We want to keep the thighs feeding back into the deep waist. So like I say, for those of us that are very flexible and we can just fall out of the joints, we don't want to do that. So keep the backs of the knees engaged. We feel like we've got gravity buttons on the inside back of the knee, and they're pulling down into the ground, which sends the thigh back up and into the deep waist and sends the shin away into the foot, and the sole of the foot gets pulled away. So we're still very active here. And then all we're going to do is we're going to bring the fingers down in front of us. And again, as the fingertips feel the ground, we've got this reciprocal pull in the palm. Palm pulls down into the ground and the long arm bones go back through the shoulders, back into the ribs. Jaw goes back into the back of the head. So we're feeding the limbs back in, and then all we're going to do is just going to take the left hand behind us and the right hand at the left knee. There's not much happening in the low spine. The hips don't get affected. So we still feel that we've got heels, back to the knees, pelvis, everything like that pulls down into the ground. The arms wrap around the ribs, and the most movement is at the rib spine. Keeping the jaw in. Keep the nose at the toes if you know that your head runs around the corner long before the rest of your body does. Can we keep using the hand at the knee and the hand at the ground to keep feeding the arms back into the ribs? That's where the rotation comes from. Because the more the arms feed in, we get space and the ribs get lifted off the waist, and the legs still can hang down. Pelvis can hang down into the ground, back to the knees, hang down into the ground, heels hang down into the ground. And if you haven't already, we'll come back to the center. Re-establish your connection, heels and hips, and then we can start to head off in the other direction. So let the right hand hit the ground and the left hand can pull. So it's just a process of, again, can we get the mind under control? Because at this point it's gripping on to, ooh, we're going into a twist. How far round can I get? All of that stuff. So can we keep just feeding the limbs back into the spine? A nice pull down through the heels and the sit bones just facilitates that rotation. Notice if the shoulder blades start to sneak round the side of the ribs, they stay firmly on the back of the ribs. If the ribs don't move, the shoulder blades can, so it's very easy for us to pull the shoulders round, even though the ribs haven't moved that much. And this side may be different to the other side. And that's okay, so we meet the body where it wants to, not where the mind thinks it should. We're going to come back to the centre. And if it's nice to lay down, then you can lay down. And if it's nice to sit, then you can sit. You find what feels nice for you. Just going to bring the legs in if you're sitting to something that is comfortable. If you're laying, just laying with the knees bent and soles of the feet into the floor. And just take a moment to make like Sarah Jane's cat, who has just completely passed out right in the middle of your mat. So just taking a moment to notice how your body feels. And just let the ground come up, the earth comes up to support you, the ground comes up to meet you. As gravity pulls us down into the ground. It's a reciprocal relationship. And just noticing the breathing as the breath comes in. It's light, it's expansive. And as the breath leaves you, tummy sinks back towards the spine, chest comes back towards the spine. Jaw comes back in. Good, and we're just going to give the fingers and toes a wiggle, making some rotations with the wrists and the ankles. And just taking the arms up over the head and the legs long. A nice stretch through the body. Bringing the knees up to the chest. Giving the knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side if you're laying down, and just coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. Returning back to sitting in your own time. Good. You worked hard today, lovelies. Go gently with yourselves. It's been a pleasure as always. I hope you found that useful.